Thunder rolled above the city hospital as lightning painted the corridors silver. I had been awake for 23 hours straight, my hands trembling from caffeine and adrenaline. Night shift always felt endless, but tonight, something was different. Room 407. The man who'd been wheeled in 3 days ago after a car crash that nearly split his skull open was still in a coma. The paper said he was Li Shun, CEO of the billion-dollar Li Tech empire. The nurses whispered about him like a legend. Cold-hearted, unreachable. A man who never smiled even in photographs. And yet here he was, looking small under the harsh fluorescent light, his face pale against the white pillow, tubes snaking from his body like fragile threads keeping him tied to this world. I checked his vitals again, steady barely. My name tag felt heavier than usual. Mei Lin, trainee nurse. No one in the ward remembered that I was filling in for a senior nurse tonight, covering her shift because my sister's college tuition was due. If I didn't earn this week's overtime, she'd be forced to drop out. That was the only thing that kept me upright as the clock hit midnight. The storm outside screamed against the glass, and for a second I thought I saw his fingers twitch. My heart skipped. Then again, stronger this time. Dr. Zhang. I shouted down the hallway, but no one answered. The other nurses were handling an emergency in pediatrics. I turned back, panic rising, as his breathing faltered into a broken rhythm. No, not on my watch. I tore open the oxygen mask, adjusted the tubes, checked the pulse. His heart rate dropped again. My mind raced. There was no doctor here, just me and a dying billionaire. Please, I whispered, pressing my palms against his chest, counting compressions in my head. Don't give up. You fought too hard already. The monitor flatlined for half a second before beeping again. Then another. Then stronger. His chest rose sharply as if his soul had been yanked back from the edge. I exhaled, tears slipping down without permission. My gloves trembled as I fixed the oxygen line properly and cleaned the blood that had seeped through his gauze. Minutes later, I turned to leave and call the doctor, but a hand gripped my wrist. Hard. I froze. His eyes, cold steel gray, half-lidded with exhaustion, were open. He was awake. Sir, I gasped, instinctively leaning forward. You're safe now. You're in. His lips parted, dry and cracked, but his voice carried like a blade cutting through air. Li Yun, I blinked. What? His gaze softened, agonizingly tender, filled with a love so deep it felt almost sacred. I found you again, he whispered, pulling my hand toward his heart. You came back. My throat closed up. Li Yun. The name echoed in my ears like a ghostly bell. I had no idea who she was, but the way he said it made my chest ache. His hand trembled around mine, refusing to let go. Sir, you've been in an accident, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. You're confused. I'm Nurse Mei Lin, But he wasn't listening. Don't leave, he murmured, eyes glistening. Not again. The thunder cracked just then, shaking the windows. And before I could pull free, before I could call for help, he smiled faintly as if at peace. Then his grip loosened, and he drifted back into sleep. I stood frozen beside him, my pulse racing, the storm roaring outside like an omen. Somewhere deep in my chest, a strange unease took root. Not fear, not pity, something in between. Because I'd seen that kind of pain before, the kind that begged for someone long gone. And I knew tonight wasn't the end of my shift. It was the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. I found you again, he whispered, gripping my wrist so tightly I couldn't breathe. By morning, the hospital was no longer a place of silence. It was a circus. Flashbulbs flared through the glass doors, reporters jostled against security, and the headlines hit faster than the rain. Billionaire so awakes from coma. Mysterious nurse by his side during miracle recovery. That mysterious nurse was me. I stood by the door of room 407, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached. The director had ordered me not to leave. I'd been requested by the patient himself, Mr. Li Shun. His doctor said my presence kept him calm. But I knew the truth. He didn't want me. He wanted her. Inside, Li Shun sat propped up against crisp white pillows, and 4 lines still running through his arm, his expression unreadable. His eyes found me the moment I entered, and a faint smile touched his lips. "You came back," he said softly, as if the night before hadn't been a fever dream. I forced a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Lee. The doctor said your vitals are improving." He reached for my hand again, fingers brushing mine. I froze. "Don't," I whispered too quietly for anyone else to hear. "Please don't call me that name." His brows furrowed. "What name?" "Lee Yoon." He stared at me for a moment as if I'd spoken nonsense. Then he said with unsettling certainty, "You are her. Don't pretend otherwise." I stepped back, heart pounding. "Sir, you've been through a major head injury. Confusion is normal." "I know my wife's touch," he interrupted, his voice trembling just slightly. "I buried her 3 years ago, but she promised she'd find me again. And here you are." There was something raw, broken, and almost childlike in his eyes that made me hesitate. It wasn't arrogance, it was grief. Still my stomach twisted. I couldn't play a dead woman's ghost. "Mr. Lee," I said carefully, "I'm your nurse, Mei Lin. I'll help you recover, but..." The door opened before I could finish. Dr. Zhang entered with the hospital director, followed by a pair of bodyguards in suits. The air instantly turned formal, cold. "Mr. Lee, sir," the director said with a rehearsed smile, "we're relieved by your recovery. The media is outside. We can hold a brief statement later today if you're feeling up to it." Li Shun's gaze never left me. "I'll speak only if she stays." The director blinked. "Sir." He nodded toward me. "My nurse. Lee Yoon." I flinched. "That's not..." "Understood," the director interrupted quickly, glaring at me behind his glasses. "Nurse Mei Lin will remain assigned to your case until further notice." I opened my mouth to protest, but one look from him silenced me. The hospital couldn't afford to offend a man whose foundation funded 2 entire wings. When the men left, Li Shun gestured toward the chair by his bedside. "Sit," he said gently, as though offering a truce. I obeyed, still shaken. He studied me for a long time, his voice soft but certain. "You're thinner than before. And your eyes, they've seen too much pain." I swallowed. "You're mistaken. Do you dream of the sea?" he asked suddenly. "Of that night on the cliff?" My breath caught. I shook my head, but his gaze deepened with quiet conviction. Li Yoon loved the sea. She said she wanted to be reborn from its waves. "You look at the world the same way she did." I didn't know what to say. My throat burned and I looked away, pretending to check his back. He sighed almost tenderly. "You don't have to remember everything right away. Trauma can steal pieces of time. But I'll help you remember us." I wanted to scream that I wasn't her, that I didn't even know what her voice sounded like. But his expression, so fragile, so full of faith, made the words die on my tongue. That night, I was still sitting by his bed long after the last rounds. He had fallen asleep, his hand inches from mine. Outside, the reporters had left. The hospital corridors were quiet again. I stood to leave when I heard his voice, soft and dreamlike. "Lee Yoon." My body went still. He turned slightly in his sleep, murmuring words I didn't understand. His face was peaceful, almost happy. I pressed my hand to my chest, where something unfamiliar stirred. It wasn't affection, it was something heavier. Guilt. Because somewhere deep inside, a cruel thought whispered, if pretending could heal him, should I? But then I caught my reflection in the window, my tired eyes, the dark circles, the trembling fingers. No, I couldn't. I wasn't her miracle. I was just the girl trying to survive another shift. The next morning, my supervisor cornered me near the nurse's station. "Mei Lin," she whispered urgently, "the director wants you to report to him after your rounds." My stomach dropped. When I entered the office, the director barely looked up from his paperwork. "You will remain with Mr. Lee for the duration of his stay," he said briskly. "He's requested you personally." "I'm not qualified to handle psychiatric cases," I argued quietly. "He's confused. He thinks I'm someone else." "Then let him." the director snapped. His donations fund our entire cardiac department. If he wants his nurse to be the Virgin Mary, you'll wear the halo. I stared at him, stunned. He leaned back, his tone cold. Your file says your sister's in medical school. Shame if her scholarship were to lapse because of disciplinary issues. My fists clenched at my sides. They had me cornered. When I returned to Li Shan's room, he looked up immediately, relief flooding his face. You came back, he said softly, as if afraid I'd vanish. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Of course. It's my duty. He reached for my wrist again, and this time I didn't pull away. He smiled faintly. See? Your hands remember me. I bit my lip, turning away before he could see the tears forming. Because no matter how many times I told myself I was only doing my job, I knew the truth. Every minute I stayed, the lie grew heavier. And every time he called me Li Yun, a part of me broke, not from love but guilt. When he softly called me Li Yun again, something inside me broke, not from love but guilt. Every morning the marble floors reflected a woman I hardly recognized. Polished uniform, hair tied tight, eyes stripped of warmth. Behind me his cold voice always sliced through the air. Late again, maid. Even if I'd been standing there for hours. He never remembered me from that night. Maybe because I'd been covered in blood, rain and fear. Or maybe he didn't want to. After all, Mr. Li was famous for hating women, especially the poor ones. Yet sometimes I caught his gaze softening, only for it to vanish as quickly as it appeared. The first time I saw the scar on his hand, something twisted in my chest. It was the same scar from that night, the one my trembling hands had wrapped in my scarf while dragging him out of the burning car. But when I touched my own neck, I could still feel the faint mark where the glass had cut me that night. A reminder that our fates had collided in fire and pain. He didn't know it, but I remembered every heartbeat of that night. The weight of his body, the smell of gasoline, his shallow breaths as I whispered, "Stay with me." And now he passed by me like a stranger in his spotless world. One afternoon, I was cleaning the piano room when a melody echoed down the hall. It wasn't from the music system he was playing. The sound was raw, lonely. Each note felt like a wound being reopened. When he noticed me, the music stopped. His fingers froze mid-key, his eyes darting toward me as if I had trespassed into a sacred memory. "What are you doing here?" His voice was tight but not angry, confused. I was assigned to clean this room, sir." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. "Then clean." Quietly. But as I turned, he said something unexpected. "Do you know this piece?" I hesitated. "It's Farewell Sonata, right? My mother used to hum it when she worked." He looked startled, as if I had opened a door to somewhere he'd locked long ago. Then in a softer voice than I'd ever heard, he said, "My mother too." For the first time we shared silence that wasn't hostile. It was almost human. That night I found myself unable to sleep. I kept hearing the piano. So I crept back into the hall. The door was slightly open. He wasn't there, but a single photograph sat beside the piano. A young boy with his mother, smiling beneath a cherry tree. And beside it a bracelet. Old, simple, made of wooden beads. The exact kind I'd seen on his wrist the night of the accident. My breath caught. That meant he had remembered something from that night. Then a voice behind me froze me in place. "Touch that and you're fired." I turned slowly. Mr. Li stood in the doorway, his face a storm of emotion. Anger, fear, maybe even grief. I bowed immediately. "I wasn't." "Do you think pity makes you special, Mei Lin?" he snapped. "You think saving my life gives you a right to look into it?" Tears burned my eyes. "No, sir. I just wanted to understand why I hate women." His laugh was hollow. "Because they lie. They use. They leave." His voice broke. For a moment he didn't look like the untouchable CEO. He looked like a man haunted by ghosts. Then he turned away, muttering under his breath, "Someday you'll see why I can't feel anything anymore." The next morning the entire mansion buzzed with whispers. His ex-fiancée, The socialite who broke his heart was visiting. When I brought coffee into the study, she was already there. Tall, elegant, perfect. "Ah, this must be your new maid," she said sweetly, eyes raking over me. "How charming. You do have a type, saving strays." Mr. Lee's jaw tightened. "Leave her out of this." "Oh, you protect her," she mocked. "I remember when you used to protect me." He looked away, silent. I tried to leave quietly, but the woman's words followed me. "You don't belong here, little maid. Men like him don't fall for girls who smell like detergent and rain." I smiled politely and said nothing, but inside my heart whispered something defiant. He already did once. He just doesn't remember. That evening I found a small box on my bedside table. Inside was my old scarf, the one I'd wrapped around his hand that night. Cleaned, folded, untouched for years. No note, no message, just silent proof that he knew. And for the first time since I entered that mansion, I let myself cry. But as my tears fell, I didn't see the shadow standing outside my door. Mr. Lee watching quietly, his expression unreadable. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it again. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Someday, Maylin, you'll know the truth about that night, and maybe you'll hate me too." The next morning, the mansion felt strangely alive. Every surface gleamed brighter. Every corridor hummed with quiet energy. I couldn't tell if it was the sunlight breaking through the stormy sky, or something shifting inside me after finding that box. That scarf had once stopped his bleeding. Now it was reopening mine. As I tied my apron and walked toward the dining hall, I kept glancing at the upper staircase. He hadn't come down yet, but I could sense his presence. Mr. Lee always carried silence like a shadow. Heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. When he finally appeared, our eyes met for just a second. And in that second, something flickered: recognition, regret, maybe even warmth. But then he looked away, businesslike as ever. "Coffee, black, and bring my car around in 10 minutes. "Yes, sir." Yet his tone wasn't as sharp as usual, almost careful. While I was polishing the silver tray, the butler whispered, "He's taking you with him today." "Me?" I blinked. "Why?" "Ask him yourself." The old man chuckled softly. "Seems the Ice Emperor finally noticed you're more than a pair of hands." I didn't know whether to laugh or panic. 10 minutes later, I stood beside his sleek black car, clutching my scarf like armor. He stepped out of the mansion, every line of his body sculpted with control. "Get in," he said simply. I obeyed. The scent of leather and faint cologne surrounded me as the city blurred past outside. For several long minutes, silence ruled. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke. "You grew up in the countryside?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. A small village near Hangzhou." "Do you regret coming here?" His question startled me. "Regret?" He glanced sideways. "You look at this place as if you don't belong." "I suppose I don't," I admitted softly. "But I came to pay a debt." He frowned. "Debt?" I looked out the window. To a man who once told me life only gives you one chance to do the right thing. There was a pause, then the faintest smile curved his lips. That man must have been wise. "He was bleeding to death at the time," I murmured. The car swerved slightly. His hand tightened on the wheel. For a heartbeat, neither of us breathed. He didn't speak again until we stopped in front of the Lee Group headquarters, a towering glass monument to his empire. Inside, his employees straightened instantly. Whispers followed us down the corridor like wind through leaves. "Who's that with him?" "His maid?" "In the office." "She must have something on him." I ignored them, focusing on the rhythm of my steps beside him. But he heard every murmur, and I could tell he hated it. In the elevator, he suddenly turned to me. "You don't have to follow me everywhere. Stay on the lobby floor." "Understood." But when the doors opened, a voice cut through the air. "Ah, Mr. Lee." It was his ex-fiancée again, dressed in flawless white, smile sharp as glass. "We meet again." He tensed. I stepped back instinctively. She glanced at me, feigning surprise. Still keeping your little savior around? How sweet. He snapped. Enough, Rulin. Oh, so she's Maylin? The one you wouldn't fire even when the board complained. Her smirk deepened. Tell me, does she know why you're really afraid of getting close to anyone? Rulin. But she didn't stop. Or that you're the reason your ex-wife died? The air froze. My stomach dropped. I looked at him in shock, but his expression was carved from stone. Get out, he said, voice deadly calm. Rulin laughed, unfazed. Still running from the truth, are we? You'll lose everything if you keep pretending, darling. When she left, silence swallowed the hallway. I stood there trembling, unable to meet his eyes. He finally spoke, voice low, cold and cracking at the edges. Go back to the car. Mr. Lee. Now. That night I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed endlessly. You're the reason your ex-wife died. Was it true? The man who risked his life for his company, who stared at his own reflection as if he hated what he saw. Had he already been punishing himself long before I entered his world? I couldn't stop thinking of his expression. The way his jaw had locked, as if he'd built walls inside himself brick by brick. So I did something foolish. I went to his study. The door was ajar, light spilling across the corridor. He was inside, sitting by the fireplace, a glass untouched on the table beside him. Papers lay scattered, photographs, old letters, a broken wedding ring. I took a hesitant step forward. Mr. Lee. He didn't look up. You shouldn't be here. I couldn't sleep, I whispered. Neither could you. Finally, his eyes lifted to mine. There was no anger left in them, only exhaustion. Do you believe in second chances, Maylin? He asked suddenly. Yes. Then you're luckier than me. He exhaled slowly. Some of us don't deserve them. I took another step closer. What happened to her? His hand clenched. She left the night of the accident. I went after her. We argued. The brakes failed. He trailed off. His voice trembled. She didn't survive. I did. Tears stung my eyes. It wasn't your fault. His gaze sharpened. Wasn't it? I built this empire for her. I ignored her until she gave up on me. And when she left, I made her chase perfection one last time on that road. His breath caught. I killed her, Maylin. Maybe not with my hands, but with everything I was. I knelt beside him. Then maybe saving you that night wasn't a coincidence. Maybe someone wanted you to start over. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. You talk like you believe I can still be saved. Because I do. For the first time his hand touched mine, tentative, unsure but real. The world outside could have vanished and I wouldn't have noticed. When I stood to leave, he said quietly, Stay. I froze. Not here, he added quickly, almost embarrassed. Just in this house. Don't quit. I wasn't planning to. A faint smile touched his lips. Good. As I turned away, his voice reached me again, barely above a whisper. Thank you for reminding me what warmth feels like. My heart clenched. I didn't realize then that this spark, the fragile thing blooming between us, would ignite everything to come. And somewhere deep inside me, a thought whispered like a prophecy. Fire saves, but it also burns. Morning sunlight spilled into the garden like gold poured from heaven. Dew clung to the petals, the world smelled of roses and rain. It should have been peaceful, but peace was something I hadn't felt in years. Mr. Lee stood by the pond, dressed not in his usual suit but in a simple shirt and rolled sleeves. He looked human, vulnerable. The ice that once surrounded him seemed to melt just a little each day, drip by drip, under a warmth neither of us could name. He turned when he heard my footsteps. You're up early. I was checking your medication schedule. His lips curved faintly. You mean you were watching me talk to the koi fish again? I froze, embarrassed. No. I was, he chuckled softly, the sound startling even him. Relax, nurse. You're terrible at lying. It was the first time he called me nurse instead of Maylin or Liyun. Somehow that small shift steadied my heart more than his smiles ever could. Days bled into weeks. The routine that once felt suffocating became comforting. Morning tea, his therapy walks, my quiet humming while preparing his meals. The house that had been haunted by loss now echoed faintly with laughter, mine and his. The staff noticed. "Sir looks 10 years younger," whispered Mrs. Chong, the head maid, as she handed me towels. "He even asked for steamed buns yesterday instead of black coffee. You've worked miracles, child." I smiled faintly. "He's healing himself. I just hand him the medicine." She patted my arm knowingly. "Sometimes medicine doesn't come in bottles." Her words lingered long after she left. One afternoon I found him on the balcony, staring into the horizon. The city stretched below us like a promise he no longer trusted. Without turning, he said, "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "I do," I answered quietly. "Every day. For me, it's finishing my exams, maybe working at a children's clinic. For you, it's..." He exhaled. "Atonement. Rebuilding. Maybe both." He turned to me then, his eyes soft. "But sometimes I wish I could forget the man I was before that crash." I hesitated. "Would you really want to forget her too?" He froze. The wind caught his sleeve, fluttering like a heartbeat. "No," he said finally. "I could never forget her. But remembering her doesn't have to mean dying with her." Something inside me broke gently open. That was the first time he spoke about his late wife without bitterness. Just love, quiet and undemanding. The next evening rain returned. The kind of rain that wrapped the world in silence. I was in the kitchen brewing tea when lightning flickered and the power went out. A shadow appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Lee." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You shouldn't move in the dark. You'll trip." Before I could answer, his hand found mine. Warm, steady, grounding. The world shrank to that touch. We stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds, until the generator hummed back to life and the lights flickered on. I pulled my hand back awkwardly. I should check the fuse box." He didn't stop me, but his gaze followed me all the way out. Later that night I passed by his study. Music drifted through the half-open door. Soft piano, melancholic but beautiful. He was playing the same melody I'd once heard faintly through his hospital monitor, while he was still unconscious. I leaned against the doorway, unable to look away. His profile was bathed in lamplight, brows furrowed, fingers moving like they were chasing ghosts. He must have sensed me there. Without turning, he murmured, "She used to fall asleep to this song." My heart ached. "It's beautiful." He finally looked up. "She said it sounded like rain washing away sins." I never believed her, until now. I smiled faintly. Then maybe it's working. For a long time, neither of us spoke. A few days later, he insisted on going out. "The air inside feels like a cage," he said. We ended up at a small park. Children were flying paper kites, their laughter rising to the clouds. He watched them silently, then whispered, "We were supposed to have one." My throat tightened. "A child?" He nodded. "She miscarried 2 months before the accident. She said she felt cursed." I told her we had time. I wanted to say something, anything, but words failed me. So I just placed my hand over his, a silent apology for a pain I could never erase. His fingers trembled, but he didn't pull away. That night, while tending his wound dressing, I noticed he was watching me. Not as his nurse, not as the shadow of his wife, but as me. "What is it?" I asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Do you ever wonder why people stay? Even when they're hurting? Because leaving would hurt more." I whispered before I could stop myself. Our eyes met. The silence between us deepened. Not heavy, not awkward, but intimate, like a secret being written in air. For the first time I saw him smile fully. A smile that reached his eyes, that erased years of sorrow in one heartbeat. And I realized I'd memorized that smile, every curve, every breath of it, without meaning to. But happiness in his world was never without shadows. That same week, his secretary arrived with urgent documents. "Sir, the board is questioning your decisions. They've noticed changes." "Changes?" he asked. "They think you're distracted, emotionally compromised." His gaze flicked toward me, then away. Tell them the company runs fine, even if I have a heart again. The secretary hesitated, then added quietly, they're also investigating Nurse Maylene's credentials. Someone's been spreading rumors that she's not who she says she is. I froze. He stood abruptly, his voice sharp. Who said that? I'm not sure, sir. But it came from someone on the board. He turned toward me then, his expression unreadable. Is there something you haven't told me? My voice barely worked. I'm not officially licensed yet. I'm still completing my training. I was supposed to take my final exam next month. For a moment, silence stretched like a blade. Then he sighed. So you risked your career to save me that night. I didn't think about the rules, I said, trembling. I just wanted to keep you alive. His eyes softened. You broke protocol for a stranger. That's either foolish or brave. Maybe both. He stepped closer, until I could feel the warmth of his breath. Then I'll protect you from the consequences, whatever they are. That night, as I returned to my room, my reflection in the mirror startled me. I was smiling. Somewhere between duty and danger, affection had bloomed. Quiet, reluctant, real. And I knew deep down that the moment he stopped seeing me as his savior and started seeing me as a woman, everything would change. Because love in his world wasn't healing. It was a storm waiting to break. That night, he looked at me, not as his wife's echo, but as the woman standing before him. The morning the world turned against me began with sunlight, too bright, too cruelly ordinary. I had just poured his tea when the doorbell shattered the silence. It wasn't the gentle ring of a guest. It was the pounding of wolves. Moments later, Mrs. Chung burst into the sitting room, breathless. Sir, reporters. They're outside. The front gate is flooded with them. Mr. Lee frowned. Reporters? Why? Before she could answer, his phone lit up with message after message. His name was already trending online. CEO's secret mistress. Young nurse living in late wife's mansion. My blood ran cold. The photo attached showed me helping him into the car yesterday. His hand on my shoulder, my face half turned in worry. The caption twisted it into scandal. Sir, He raised his hand gently. Don't say anything yet. The phone buzzed again. His secretary's name flashed. He picked up. What's going on, Lynn? The voice on the other end trembled. Sir, it's bad. The board is furious. Investors are demanding a statement. They say you've lost control. He stared out the window, expression unreadable. So they'd rather see me cold again, is that it? Sir, He ended the call. The room fell silent except for the distant click of cameras through the iron gates. By noon, the hospital issued a statement. The nurse in question, identified as Mei Lin, was under supervised training. All professional boundaries were respected. It sounded clinical, detached. But it wasn't enough to stop the storm. Headlines grew crueler by the hour. Grieving CEO finds replacement for dead wife. Small-town nurse seduces billionaire benefactor. Lee Corporation in crisis as public demands resignation. Each word cut deeper than any knife. I hid in my room, hands shaking as I scrolled. My sister's message blinked unread. Jia, what's happening? Is it true? I wanted to scream to tell her I'd done nothing wrong. That the only thing I'd ever given this man was compassion. But in a world that fed on spectacle, truth was too quiet to matter. That evening, the mansion's hallways felt suffocating. I found him sitting in the study, head bowed. His usually perfect composure cracked by exhaustion. Mr. Lee, I whispered. I should leave. If I go, they'll calm down. He looked up slowly. You think this is your fault? Isn't it? My voice broke. I should have refused to come here. I should have stayed at the hospital. Now your company, your name, everything's ruined. He stood, his shadow towering. No, Maylin. I ruined myself the day I stopped caring what people thought. He came closer, his voice low and fierce. You think I didn't know how the world would twist this? I didn't bring you here to hide. I brought you here to live. But they're saying, they can say what they want. He gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. I buried one woman because I cared too much about reputation. I won't lose another because of fear. For a moment I couldn't breathe. He wasn't confessing love. He was declaring war. By nightfall, the board of directors summoned him for an emergency meeting. I waited in the darkened living room. Every clock ticked louder than the last. When he returned hours later, rain clung to his coat. His expression was a mask carved in stormlight. They gave me an ultimatum, he said quietly. Cut ties with you, or lose my position. My heart stuttered. And you? He smiled, but it was a broken thing. I told them I'd rather lose my title than my conscience. Tears burned behind my eyes. Why would you risk everything for me? Because you saved me when I didn't deserve it, he said simply. And maybe it's time I repay that debt, not with money but with truth. He turned to the window where lightning streaked the sky. Tomorrow there's a shareholder event. Every camera in the city will be there. And so will we. I shook my head. You can't. They'll crucify you. His gaze softened. Then let them. But they'll hear the truth from me first. The next day felt unreal. He stood on stage beneath a sea of flashing lights, reporters shouting, investors whispering. I waited behind the curtain, heart pounding like thunder in my chest. When the murmurs finally quieted, he began. Many of you have heard the rumors, he said, voice steady. You've seen the pictures. You've made your judgments. Let me give you the truth you refused to ask for. He gestured toward me. The lights shifted, blinding. I wanted to vanish, but his voice anchored me. This woman, he continued, is the reason I'm standing here alive. When my car crashed, she was the nurse who refused to give up. She worked 3 shifts straight to keep me breathing. She didn't do it for money. She didn't do it for fame. She did it because she still believes human life matters more than image. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in. He paused, then looked straight into the crowd. If caring for the person who saved me is a crime, then I am guilty. If gratitude makes me weak, then I no longer wish to be strong. The silence that followed was heavy, trembling. I felt tears blur my vision. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind grief or arrogance. He was free, raw, exposed, honest. Then he turned slightly toward me and said, voice barely above a whisper yet loud enough to echo, my company stands because of her courage. Judge me if you dare. The fallout was immediate and unpredictable. Half the audience applauded. The other half walked out. The news cycle exploded again, this time divided between admiration and outrage. But for me, none of it mattered. Because when the cameras finally shut off and the lights dimmed, he walked toward me, not as a man seeking redemption, but as someone finally at peace with his scars. I told the truth, he said softly. Whatever happens now, I'll face it. I nodded, tears falling freely. You already did. He smiled faintly. Then maybe for once I'm not alone. That night, as the city buzzed with rumors, we sat side by side on the mansion balcony. The storm had passed. The air smelled of wet earth and freedom. For the first time he reached out, not as a broken man grasping for the past, but as someone learning how to hold on to the present. And though the world outside still called me names, in that quiet moment under the fading rain, I realized something profound. It was never about being believed by everyone. It was about being seen by someone. If loving her means betrayal, he said, then I've betrayed enough ghosts. I never thought the night I'd see Mr. Lee again would be the night his empire began to crumble. The golden lights of the Lee Corporation Tower flickered like dying embers against the storm outside. Reporters gathered below, shouting his name as news broke that the company's stock had crashed overnight. Whispers of fraud, betrayal, and a secret deal gone wrong spread like wildfire. Inside the marble lobby, I stood in my maid's uniform, my last night here. I'd come only to collect the few belongings I had left from the staff quarters. But when the elevator doors opened, and I saw him standing there, disheveled, hollow-eyed, and pale as moonlight, my heart clenched painfully. Why are you here? His voice was hoarse but still carried the weight of command. I came to get my things, I replied quietly, clutching the strap of my worn-out bag. And to say goodbye. His tie hung loose around his neck, his once perfect suit wrinkled and soaked at the cuffs. He looked nothing like the man who'd once made the world tremble with a glance. Yet somehow he had never looked more human. You shouldn't be here tonight, he muttered, glancing toward the elevators where board members rushed up and down in panic. It's chaos. I've lived through worse, I said softly. He turned sharply, eyes burning. Don't talk like that, Lin. Don't you dare talk like everything's the same. You have no idea what I've lost, what they're trying to take from me. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You're wrong. I know exactly what it feels like to lose everything. I lost my home, my father, my name. You were part of that world, remember? His expression faltered, guilt flickering across his face. That wasn't my doing. I never. No, I cut in. But you looked away. When your father ruined mine, you looked away. Silence stretched between us. Rain beat against the glass behind him. I saw the weight of years crash down on his shoulders, the ruthless empire he'd built now devouring him alive. He exhaled slowly, voice trembling. I didn't know until it was too late. My father. He hid the documents. By the time I found out, you were already gone. The words hit me like cold rain. I'd spent years thinking he'd been part of it. The deal that drove my family into ruin. The reason I'd become nothing more than a servant in his mansion. And now? I asked quietly. What will you do when everything else is gone? He looked at me, raw vulnerability flickering in his dark eyes. I don't know. Maybe start over. I wanted to believe him. But the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. His secretary Mei Lin rushed in. Mr. Lee, she gasped. The board is voting to remove you. They have evidence, emails, signatures from the offshore accounts. They're blaming you for everything your father did. He froze. That's impossible. She handed him a tablet, the screen glowing blue. I watched the color drain from his face as he scrolled through the documents. He whispered, they forged them. A flash of pity surged through me. The mighty CEO betrayed by the very people he protected. The son paying for his father's sins. He turned to me, desperation creeping into his voice. Lin, you worked in the records room, didn't you? You saw the files, my father's ledgers. I nodded hesitantly. Then you know I'm telling the truth. Help me prove it. Please. The word please from his lips cut deeper than any command ever had. I took a step back. After what your family did to mine, you expect me to save yours? He clenched his fists, pain flashing across his face. No. I'm asking you to save me. For a long moment I said nothing. Then I looked at him. This man who once stood above the world now shattered, his kingdom crumbling around him. Fine, I whispered. But after tonight we're even. We slipped into his office, once filled with luxury, now half empty and echoing with dread. Rain pounded harder against the windows. Lightning flickered as I began to sift through the old digital archives. There they were, the signatures, the hidden accounts, the transactions linking back to his father, not him. The proof of his innocence buried under years of lies. He leaned over my shoulder, his breath shallow. You found it. Before I could respond, the office door burst open. 2 men from the board entered, flanked by security. Lee Chun, one of them sneered. The board has voted. You're finished. Mr. Lee straightened, jaw tightening. You're making a mistake. No, the man replied coldly. You made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. As they approached, I instinctively stepped in front of him. Wait, I said. You can't take him yet. We have proof. One of the guards shoved me aside roughly, knocking me to the floor. My hand scraped against the marble, pain shooting up my arm. Mr. Lee lunged forward. Don't touch her. For a second I saw it again, that same fire from the night of the accident, the night he'd almost died. He fought them off as I pulled the flash drive from the terminal, clutching it to my chest. Lee Chun. Go. I shouted. He hesitated only a moment before grabbing my hand. Together we ran down the corridor. alarms blaring behind us. The elevator doors slammed shut just as security reached the hall. Inside, breathless and trembling, I looked at him. His hair wet, shirt torn, eyes filled with something between rage and sorrow. "We're not done yet," he said. "Not until they know the truth." And in that fleeting second, as the elevator descended into darkness, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just saving him anymore. I was choosing him. The elevator doors opened with a hollow clang into the underground parking garage, dim, echoing, and filled with the scent of oil and rain. Alarms still screamed faintly above us, muffled by the concrete walls. Mr. Lee's grip was tight on my wrist as he pulled me through the shadows between cars, his voice low and ragged. "Keep moving. They'll seal the exits soon." I stumbled behind him, heart pounding. "Where are we going?" "To someone who still owes me loyalty," he said grimly. The sleek black sedan at the far corner came into view. He slammed open the door and threw the flash drive into the glove box before collapsing behind the wheel. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes burning with the fire of a man who had nothing left to lose. When the car roared to life, the garage lights flickered again. I could see the reflection of police vehicles arriving outside, blue and red lights painting chaos across the walls. As we sped into the rain-soaked night, silence stretched between us, broken only by the wiper's rhythm and our shallow breaths. Finally I asked, "Where are we really going?" He glanced at me, water glistening in his dark hair. "My father's old villa. If we can reach the safe room, I can access the original contracts before they're destroyed." "Destroyed?" I echoed. He nodded. "The board has already sent people to wipe everything clean. They're rewriting history, burying every trace that could prove my innocence." I turned toward the window, watching the city blur into streaks of silver. "You sound like a man running from ghosts." He smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile. "Aren't we both?" His words lingered in the space between us, raw and heavy. For a moment I saw him not as the untouchable CEO, but as the boy who'd once handed me a red umbrella in the rain years ago, before his world devoured mine. We reached the outskirts of the city just before dawn. The Lee family villa stood at the top of a mist-covered hill, silent and decaying, the windows dark like watching eyes. As we stepped inside, my skin prickled with unease. Dust clung to the chandeliers and faded portraits lined the hallway, his ancestors staring down at us with judgment. "This place," I whispered. "It feels like time stopped here." He walked ahead, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. It did. The night my father died, everything froze. We descended into the basement, walls lined with old ledgers, crates of documents, and a single digital vault that hummed faintly. He knelt beside it, typing in a long sequence of codes. "If the files are still here, this will prove that my father orchestrated every offshore deal. The board blamed me because I inherited his name, not his crimes." I stepped closer, my breath visible in the cold air. "And what happens after you clear your name?" He stopped typing, fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know. Maybe I walk away. Maybe I start again. Maybe," he looked at me, "maybe I try to make things right, with you." My heart twisted painfully. "Don't say things you don't mean, Lee Chun. Not when you're desperate." But his gaze didn't waver. "I mean every word. You saved my life once and now you're saving it again. I can't keep pretending that doesn't matter." Before I could respond, the vault beeped and opened with a metallic hiss. A folder labeled Lee Holdings Legacy, Private appeared on the holographic screen. He smiled, relief washing over his face. "This is it." Then footsteps. Dozens of them. He froze. I turned toward the stairs. Flashlights danced through the cracks of the door, and voices barked orders in the dark. "They found us," I whispered. He grabbed the flash drive and shoved it into my hand. "Take it. If they catch me, they can't get this." "What?" "No. I'm not leaving you." His voice sharpened. "Lynn, you listen to me. You're the only one they won't suspect. Get out through the west exit. There's a hidden tunnel. My father built it during the investigation years ago." I shook my head violently, eyes stinging. "I'm not running again." But the door above burst open before I could say more. Security men flooded the stairwell, shouting. Lee Chun pushed me behind a pillar just as a gunshot echoed through the basement. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Go!" he shouted. "I can't." His eyes, dark and desperate, met mine for the last time. "If you ever cared about me, go." Tears blurred my vision as I turned and sprinted through the narrow passage behind the vault. The tunnel was cold, damp, and endless. My lungs burned, my legs shaking, but I didn't stop. When I finally reached the other side, dawn had broken. The city skyline glowed faintly in the distance. I collapsed onto the wet grass, clutching the flash drive to my chest. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. From far away, I could hear faint sirens, helicopters circling the villa, and my heart broke with every sound. Had they taken him? Had they killed him? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had his truth, and his last words echoing in my head. "If you ever cared about me, go." The drive pulsed faintly in my hand, a tiny spark of hope against the dying light. I wiped my tears, stood and whispered into the wind, "I'll clear your name, Lee Chun, even if the whole world turns against me." And as the sun rose over the ruins of his empire, I took my first step toward redemption, his and mine. It had been 6 months since the night I ran from that basement with the flash drive clutched against my heart. 6 months since the world saw the mighty Lee Corporation collapse under the weight of its own lies. The news had called it the fall of the Golden Empire. But to me, it was simply the aftermath of one man's truth and another's silence. I lived quietly now, far from the city, in a small coastal town where the air tasted of salt and peace. I worked in a free community clinic, patching up fishermen's hands and delivering medicine to mothers who couldn't afford hospitals. It was the life I had once dreamed of, simple, honest, and free. And yet, every night, as I washed my hands under cold water, I saw his face in the reflection of the glass. Lee Chun. No longer the untouchable CEO. No longer the man haunted by another woman's ghost. Just the man who had looked at me one last time and said, "If you ever cared about me, go." I did go. And I never saw him again. Until that morning. The clinic was half empty, sunlight filtering through thin curtains, when I heard the radio playing from the reception desk. A familiar voice, steady, deep, calm, filled the air. "This is Lee Chun, former CEO of Lee Holdings," the broadcast said. "I stand here today not to defend what I've lost, but to return what was never mine to begin with." My hands froze. The metal tray clattered against the floor. I turned toward the radio. The announcer continued, "In a stunning act of redemption, Lee Chun has confessed to the company's hidden crimes, accepting personal responsibility for all damage caused under his leadership. His confession has already led to the arrest of several board members. He is scheduled to testify before the national court this week." My knees nearly gave out. He was alive. Not just alive, but fighting. I ran outside, breath sharp against the cold air. The sea wind tangled my hair, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry, not out of grief but relief. "Lee Chun," I whispered. "You kept your promise." Later that evening, as the sky turned to amber and lilac, I walked home through the narrow streets, my heart still trembling. A little boy selling flowers waved at me. "Miss Nurse, want to buy some lilies?" Lilies. His wife's favorite flower, the same ones he'd once placed on my hospital desk when he thought I was her ghost. I bought a small bundle and carried them with me, unaware of how fate was already circling back. When I reached my small apartment, there was an envelope wedged under the door. No return address. Just my name, written in the same bold handwriting I could never forget. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single note and a white business card. "If you still believe truth can heal, come tomorrow. No cameras. No past. LC." Below it, the address of a cafe. The next morning I arrived before dawn. The cafe sat by the sea, quiet and warm, its windows fogged with steam. He was already there, sitting near the corner table, back to the sunrise. My breath caught in my throat. He looked human. Not the man who once ruled the boardrooms with a glance, but a man stripped of armor. His hair was shorter, his suit plain, his eyes softer than I remembered. "Lin Yu," he said, standing as I approached. I smiled faintly. "You remembered my name this time." His lips curved gently. "I never forgot it." We sat across from each other in silence for a long moment, listening to the sound of the waves crashing beyond the glass. "I watched your press conference," I said finally. "You did something no one else in your position would have done." "I owed it to her," he said. "To my wife. To the people she tried to protect. And," his gaze flickered to me, "to you." My chest tightened. "Why me?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "Because when the world was built on lies, you were the only one who told me the truth. Even when it hurt." I swallowed hard, unsure how to breathe. He continued, "I'll serve time for what I allowed to happen. Maybe that's what redemption really means. Not escaping punishment, but facing it willingly." I nodded slowly. "And after that?" He smiled faintly, eyes glinting with something like peace. "After that, I'll start again. Maybe not as a CEO, but as someone who remembers what it feels like to be saved." I looked down at my hands, still trembling slightly. "You were never the only one who needed saving." His fingers brushed mine across the table. The touch was fleeting, hesitant, almost reverent. "Then maybe," he whispered, "we saved each other." We sat there until the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the sea. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow of someone else's story. I felt like my own beginning. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me. He simply rose too, holding out the bouquet of lilies the boy had sold me the day before. "You forgot these," he said softly. I smiled. "No. I think they finally found where they belong." He laughed quietly, an unfamiliar sound, light and warm. "You've changed me, Lin Yu. Whether you stay or go, thank you." I turned toward the door, heart full yet breaking. "Goodbye, Li-chan." "Not goodbye," he said. "Just until peace finds us both." That night, I walked along the shoreline where the tide kissed the sand. The moon hung high above, silver and calm. I thought about how pain had led us both here, how he'd once mistaken me for a ghost, and how I'd once mistaken pity for love. But what grew from those mistakes wasn't sorrow. It was healing. I released one white lily into the ocean. It drifted away, its petals glowing under the moonlight like forgiveness taking form. And in that quiet moment, I knew the story wasn't about him remembering me. It was about me remembering myself. Healing doesn't erase scars. It teaches you to live gently with them. I used to think healing was a single moment, like a light turning on in the dark. But now, as I sit by my window under the quiet hum of the rain, I know it's not that simple. Healing isn't a switch. It's a rhythm. A pulse that takes time to find its beat again. My name is Lin Yu, and this is the final page of a story I never meant to live. Outside, the night shift is just beginning at the clinic. I can hear the distant wail of an ambulance, the rush of footsteps, the murmurs of people clinging to hope. I still work late, sometimes too late, because saving others has become my way of remembering that I was once saved too. There's a photograph pinned above my desk. An ocean horizon taken on my old phone. No faces, no names, just water meeting sky. But every time I look at it, I think of him. Li Chen. The man who woke from the edge of death calling me by another woman's name. The man who once built his world on walls so high, even love couldn't climb them. And yet, somehow we both found a way to reach each other through the cracks. I used to resent him for mistaking me for someone else, for seeing a ghost instead of me. But now I realize that he wasn't trying to replace his wife. He was trying to fill the silence she left behind, with anything that still felt alive. And in that emptiness I became a mirror. A reflection that helped him see the truth he'd buried. People say love is about finding someone who completes you. But I think real love is about finding someone who helps you remember who you already are. When he confessed everything publicly, the world called him a fool. But I saw something different. I saw a man brave enough to lose everything so he could finally deserve peace. That kind of courage doesn't come from power. Comes from pain. And I understood it because I'd lived it too. There was a time when I defined myself by other people's needs. My patience. My family. Even my guilt. I believed that caring meant sacrificing, that love meant staying quiet. But the truth is, healing others only works when you stop abandoning yourself. That's what Lee Chan taught me. Not with his words, but with his surrender. When I left him by the seaside that morning, I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. I just knew we had to part, not because we didn't care, but because we finally did. He needed to make peace with his past. I needed to make peace with my worth. And somehow that goodbye became the most honest love story I've ever known. Sometimes, in the middle of a shift, I imagine he's walking through the hospital corridors again. Not as a patient this time, but as a man who understands what it means to start over. Maybe he's helping rebuild the clinic his wife once dreamed of. Maybe he's somewhere far away, holding a cup of coffee, thinking of lilies by the ocean. But I don't wait for him anymore. Because this story was never about him finding his wife again. It was about both of us learning to live beyond ghosts. His and mine. And I think maybe that's what love really is. Not rescue. Not possession. But recognition. Two broken people meeting at the exact moment their hearts still remembered how to feel. The thunder outside softens into rain. I close my diary, the final page written, the ink still fresh. I whisper softly to the night, as if he might somehow hear me across miles of sea and silence. I forgive you. And thank you. For teaching me that even when love fades, kindness remains. Because kindness, that's what stays. It's what healed me when I was exhausted and unseen. It's what made him reach out even when he was drowning. It's what keeps the world turning quietly between heartbreaks. The rain slows to a drizzle. I turn off the lamp, leaving the room in silver moonlight. My reflection looks back from the glass. Not the frightened nurse who once hid behind her uniform, but a woman who finally sees herself clearly. Somewhere deep inside I feel peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough. And maybe that's all any of us are ever meant to find. So if you're listening to my story right now, wondering if your pain will ever end, it won't vanish overnight. But one day you'll wake up, and it won't hurt the same way anymore. You'll breathe without guilt. You'll smile without apology. And that's how you'll know you've healed. Because love isn't always the ending. Sometimes it's the beginning that teaches you who you truly are. That was my journey, from the cold hospital lights to the calm of the sea. If you believe mercy can heal what love could not, share your truth below. Maybe together, we can remind the world that even the softest hearts can survive the hardest storms.